ESPN is picking up the option for the ACC television contract with more revenue allegedly coming for the top tier teams. Will this help the Noles stay in the Atlantic Coast Conference?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you once again for using that, because I'll tell you what, Gametime is something that can save you some money. But talk about money, that's what today's show is all about. The Seminoles and the Tigers from Clemson are allegedly going to stick with the ACC per an article, and I'll go through a bunch of the details and read quite a bit of it to you from ESPN here in a second. But before I go into that, I just want to ask this question, because I ask myself the same. If you follow Florida State or college football or even just college athletics in general, what % chance did you honestly think, even yesterday or the day before, that Florida State and or Clemson would long-term stick with the ACC? I gave that maybe 5%. Maybe. The notion of there being any way to make this work, for me, was all but null and void. Just ask yourself that. It just goes to show that there's a lot of ways to get things done, at least potentially speaking. Now, before I go into this article and all that, I want to give a little bit of an overview for those of you that just want the cliff notes, and then we can get into the details. Here's the big part of this. The ACC contract that began in 2016 with ESPN had a rollover at like 10 years. If it is not picked up after the 27 season, it's done, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But it looks like that's been taken care of. They had till February 1st, and they just signed it. Now, I'm going to go into the details here in a second per the article, but there's also a couple other things I just want to ask. Again, I'll go into the details in the article, and I'll read the quotes and all that stuff. Jim Phillips involved, all that stuff. But what would you think is fair for Florida State? Here's the key. I put this on the Locked On Seminoles X handle. What percentage of the revenue should Florida State get? Per a report, Florida State generates about 15% of the TV revenue per year. Should they get the exact number that they get each year? Should it be capped at 20%, capped at 25%, something different? There are a lot of ways to look at it, but they're only getting roughly 7% or a little over that. That's a big chunk of change they're leaving on the table, about half, a little over half. So that's rough. So I understand why they're concerned while they're chasing the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of their ability to fight for revenue, to get the best players, to get the best coaches, to get the best facilities, to produce the best fan experience in Tallahassee, no matter what the sport is, and compensate everybody involved. Absolutely. This is America. You gain what you've earned. Well, in the ACC, it hasn't been that way. And maybe there'll be more contracts like this. But before, again, I go into the quotes, there's a couple of things that I think they're interesting topics that they use for this. Number one is value adds. Now, what the heck is, when I first heard that and I read it, I'm like, what? I thought they were talking about ad revenue. No, it's not that at all. It's about adding more marquee matchups. If the ESPN contract was going to be signed, the ACC, Jim Phillips at the top of it, we're trying to set it up where they would have more marquee matchups with the ACC, some out of conference, etc., that the ESPN brand would be going out there and showcasing. I don't know if that means more Thursday and Friday. I don't know how that works, but more elite games so they can get higher revenue from their advertisers and just give a better product. I'm okay with great games. It's not often that I agree with advertising and all that, but great games are what we're here for, right? So it's the rarest of the rare, so take the win there. But the secondary part of this, and I doubt that the ACC would be disappointed with this anyway, they want Notre Dame to be a part of it. And Notre Dame recently, Pete Bavacqua had talked about, he's their AD now, that they were probably going to do something with Clemson moving forward. So that would play right into that. So it seems pretty great. But there's a couple other questions here. Number one, even if Florida State and or Clemson were to drop their lawsuits, and again, this article from ESPN says that that's part of it. Would there be any back pay for legal fees? How would they do any of that stuff? Is everything just dropped? I had that as a question. And how much of the cut would the schools receive? That's something I'm going to bring up several times as I read this. To put it mildly, this is not an easy thing to break down. So I'm going to do what I can here to give you an overview of some of this and read through some of the key highlights. But again, the contract is signed through 2036. So I'm going to share my screen for those of you that are on YouTube. And for those of you not, I'm going to be reading it anyway. So it's not a big deal. But this is a really unique scenario. And quite honestly, again, I was shocked that this came about. And I'm pretty happy that they've come up with something that's at least an option for it. So here we go with the top of the article, and we'll get into the meat potatoes. ESPN has agreed to pick up its option to continue broadcasting ACC sports through 2036. Sources told ESPN the agreement is a critical step toward securing stability for the conference. With the television deal settled, the ACC is now working towards a settlement with Clemson and Florida State that could end these schools' ongoing lawsuits against the conference. ESPN had until the 1st of February to pick up the option on a 20-year contract signed in 2016 that helped to launch the ACC network. Had ESPN declined, the partnership would have ended after the 27 season. ESPN declined comment to pick up the option. After ESPN agreed to pick up the option, a decision the ACC Board of Directors voted to approve Wednesday, sources said the conference is working on additional value adds. That's what I was talking about with Notre Dame, and they've got some other things in mind too, I'm sure, but which could include creating more marquee matchups in football and men's hoops to maximize content on the networks which would help pave the way towards the new revenue distribution model and a settlement with Clemson and Florida State. Multiple athletic directors told ESPN this would also involve using the ACC's relationship with Notre Dame to strategically create more games against the conference's top-tier teams. Earlier this month, Notre Dame athletic director Pete Bavacqua said he was open to playing games against Clemson in the future. Notre Dame currently plays 5 to 6 regular season games against ACC annually and is a member in all other sports. Now, I want to skip down here just a little bit, and this is where it gets really interesting to me. I don't know where you thought this was going to end or how long it was going to take, but if this really does come to fruition, there's a lot of different things you can look at for points where you'd say, well, there's just no going back now. So anyway, Clemson and Florida State have both argued that the ACC's television contract, which earns the conference about half of what the Big Ten receives from Fox, puts the schools at a significant financial disadvantage. It does, compared with the rivals in the Southeastern Conference and Big Ten, making it impossible to consistently compete for national championships. As part of the settlement, Clemson and Florida State are asking the ACC to agree to reduce penalties for exiting the grant of rights after 2031, when the contract for the Big Ten, SEC, and Big 12 were all set to expire. So that's about the only detail right there, that last part, in reference to Florida State having the opportunity to get rid of, I'm sure for reference that Clemson wants the same thing. They want to get another out in case there's something else they screw up, which would be smart on Florida State's part and Clemson's for that matter. Even if this goes through to 2036, if they're not being treated fairly, and I'm guessing that the 15%, the other schools in the league aren't going to want like 3-4 teams to get like 3 times as much revenue. There's still going to be infighting inside the conference now, is why I bring this up. And we're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Seminoles, because there's still a long way to go, but it is possible Florida State stays in the ACC. Attending NFL playoffs games and the Super Bowl is an experience like no other. Energy, the excitement, and the connection with the fans is unmatched. Going to a playoff game and seeing your team win is a thrill of a lifetime, and it's one you will never forget. This year, Gametime makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with the new feature, Gametime Picks. It filters out the fluff, shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there at the game. Gametime's Picks is something that I've used when I've looked at tickets for looking at a Magic game, looking at tickets to go to a game in Atlanta. You can use it if you want for something like going to a theater. You can use it for a play. You can use it for just about any event, for music or anything else that comes with a ticket. It's not just sports with Gametime. They have examples for anything you can imagine. Make sure you check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Florida State leaving the conference is not a lock, and details matter. So I want to just bring up some things that I'm thinking of. And if you're a lawyer out there, especially, you want to comment on this down below, fire away, brother. Fire away, sister. You want to talk about what you would do and why? I'm not a lawyer. Have at it. I would love it. If you're a financial advisor, if you're somebody who runs your own business, whatever, if you've got a take, I want to hear it. And to be honest, I think there's a lot of ways to look at this, but the following is just my thought process on how this works. Now, again, to summarize, marquee matchups, there's going to be a brand fund. They're talking about like the top 4 teams, North Carolina, Miami, Florida State, Clemson were the teams they said most likely for football. And I agree with that. You could say Georgia Tech could sneak in there and it could change, blah, blah, blah. But why not just make it simple? Here's my idea. If you're going to do it by who earns. Out of the 100%, this is just straightforward math. If somebody earns 13% of the television revenue, well, guess how much money do their athletic department gets? Then 13%. If Florida State earns 11% one year, they were down. Well, you know what? They only get 11%. This is America. You get what you deserve from your efforts. Pretty simple. Now, the one caveat I will say is if it gets too much of a disparity, but in a situation where like Wake Forest isn't going to, they got a small stadium. There's only 4,000 or so students there. It's a different kind of deal. You got to make your competition still be competitive. They got to find a way to help those schools out. They're not going to win as often. Dave Clawson just decided to walk away. I heard he's not a big NIL guy and all that anyway. But outside of that, maybe like 1% from these schools goes into a pot each year. Maybe you just get 1% off the top, maybe 1.5% from a Florida State or a Clemson or something to help these other schools out. I could at least be brought to the table to discuss that. In addition to the brand fund for having these big games against Notre Dame, or maybe it's a Texas or somebody that schedules a series with Miami or Florida State or North Carolina, whatever it may be. Maybe they do like North Carolina, Texas, because Mac coached at both. That'd be great. You have to find ways to do that, to put money aside for different teams in the league in different scenarios. I get it. And I understand there's Title IX and things like that as well. But for the league to stay together, let's not kid ourselves. The reason Clemson and Florida State both jumped in this boat and sued the Atlantic Coast Conference is they were getting their tail kicked on settling up with anything even remotely competitive with the Big Ten and SEC. They didn't have to get white contracts. They didn't have to be dollar for dollar. Those leagues are better. I get it. But I mean, like, they're roughly double, depending on how you want to look at it. And there's different parameters to go through, but the contracts are ridiculously different. I understand why both Florida State and Clemson wanted out. I have no problem with that. And I highly doubt that many people that are in business do either. Again, comment with your thoughts. But what else could Florida State do, or Clemson, if you want to go from that perspective, to sweeten the pot? Again, I will bring up back pay, the legal fees, and just back pay in general. Like the last few years, maybe the first 5 years of the ACC deal with ESPN, not only is there a brand fund, but they get an extra 2% on top of to make up for getting basically kicked while they were down. Because Florida State, I mean, they had a really great 23 season. Clemson is a program that, I mean, they held the league together pretty strong for a while. They won titles in 16 and 18. Where would the ACC have been after Florida State started to slide off a little bit? Where would it have been without Clemson? I get why those schools are so ticked off. Maybe they get a little extra. I don't know how you want to do it. I would at least negotiate that with the conference brass. You have nothing to lose. And that would also help you understand, once again, remember now, in that article on ESPN, and I'll give the names out for the authors here too. I should do that. They did a good job on this. I thought it was pretty well done. Florida State, they want to have the option to leave after 2031 without the massive consequences. The two people that wrote the article for ESPN, by the way, are David Hale and Andrea Adelson. Congrats to them. They did a very good job of explaining it. I thought it was pretty darn well done. But if Florida State is still looking to possibly leave after 2031, that tells you there's not a ton of trust in the ACC. So my idea of sweetening the pot, I don't think that it's a lone wolf perspective. I would imagine that Clemson and Florida State's athletic directors, board of trustees, maybe even the coaches, I don't know, but several people of influence, the NIL groups, they're probably like, look, we need to have a backdoor exit. If we're going to stick with you guys and not publicly continue on with our lawsuits, what's in it for us? Because we want to make sure that the next deal, you have incentive through what we've got coming to us in 2031, if we option to do so. If you're not going to find a way to make it competitive moving forward in a way that we like, we're out. But by making it 2031, your recruiting isn't going to be impacted because nobody you sign in the next couple of years would play past then anyway. So it's a working model. I'm good with that. Here are a couple other questions that I have for y'all. And again, you can do whatever you want with this, but these are just some things that I have on my mind. Moving forward, what else can Florida State do to improve its revenue? With the TV model and all this, I think there's a lot of ways you can look at it, but they have to find additional ways to make money. I get TV is the key to it, but they got to find new advertising partners, et cetera. That's traditional revenue, but there has to be something else. Maybe it's something online. I don't know, but there's different ways to monopolize your brand because Florida State's a big brand. They need to find a way to do it. If you have a comment, let's hear it on YouTube down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what you got to say. Also, how could extra money help Florida State? Well, obviously money's great to have, but look at it from your own perspective. If you were the AD or somebody on the BOT or a major influencer with the NIL collectives, whatever it may be, with the extra revenue Florida State would get with this contract, again, assuming they drop everything with the ACC, how would you try to allot everything to make it work better for Florida State? Just getting the money is part of it. Now you've got to maximize its value. What are some of the keys? Maybe rank like 2 or 3 things they need to do. Remember, they got the Bill Campbell Stadium construction thing. It's supposed to be done this summer for the first game against Alabama. We'll see if that gets done. They've got the situation with contracts for coaches across the board. You got NIL. You've got the situation with Title IX's always there, so you got to take care of both sides of the ledger. It's not just like football, basketball. You got NIL and all that for everybody. There are a lot of things to think about. How would you do it, and why would it work? Finally, do you really think they're just going to drop the lawsuit, or what's it going to take specifically for a percentage? This is my last question. Maybe it's the most important. What percentage does Florida State got to have from this value add, or however you want to say it? It's the brand fund. What percentage is it going to take? Or will they just, maybe they go like, we have to get at least 12% every year minimum. And if we go above that, we get it. We can't go below. There's a million ways to do it. But like I said earlier, I think you get what you earned. And there should be a little back pay for how Florida State and Clemson have helped carry the league in football for a long time. And to be honest with you, I don't know if anybody could argue with that, because the ACC without those two teams hasn't had anybody in the national title hunt, period. They just haven't in the last, I don't even know what. I mean, Michael Vick, and ironically, because they played Florida State in 99, that team was great, but what other ACC team was in the national title game? How's that happen? You know, like Miami's run was before. Like, this is really wild. They've got to find a way to compensate the Noles. When we come back, I got a little bit of a recruiting thought. It's got some big recruiting news getting ready to happen this weekend. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. Florida State is going to be hosting yet another big group of visitors this next weekend. Now, the Noles are doing a tremendous job with the class of 26 and to some degree, class of 27. But there is something that I believe that most programs don't do well, although Florida State historically has done this extremely well. And that's once you hit a home run at a school and you get a really good player, do you maximize? For whatever reason, certain high schools, and you could pick a state, they just produce dudes. You have to find a way to not only get the best player there, but build a network so you can come right back and get another one. Here's a great example. Mario Nash Jr. is one of the best offensive linemen in the country. He signed with Florida State in the class of 2025. He's interviewed here on the Locked On Seminoles podcast before, and he brought up a kid a couple of times when I'd spoken to Mario. He's like, Demarius Yates, I want that kid to play with me. And when he first mentioned Demarius' name, I'm like, I don't know who that is. What? Give me the backdrop. He said, it's the running back in my high school. He's electric. This is a guy that could play for anybody. He's an elite player. Went and watched a few clips of his film, and it didn't take very long. And I'm like, okay, he's legit. And this is a young man that is being coveted by schools across country. Florida State is going to get him on campus here soon. And I just wanted to use that again as an example. It is very, very important. Florida State got to the well, and they filled up. They got one of the best offensive tackles, a guy I think will eventually be Florida State's left tackle one day, in Mario Nash Jr. That's great. But if you can go back and try another kid out of the Magnolia State, especially from that high school again, Kemper County High School in DeKalb, Mississippi's got players every year. That's a program that Florida State needs to hit, and they need to hit it hard. It's one of about 10, 15 schools in that state, for whatever reason, constantly has somebody. Good for them and good for looking out. Now, Florida State, as I mentioned a minute ago, one of the reasons I got into recruiting is how Bowden manipulated different relationships and did a tremendous job for years and years and years and years. The Valdosta area, in the Tampa area, South Florida, etc. He always had good relationships. Jimbo did a good job with that too, like Miami Central. It's hard to get kids away from the University of Miami. He won some big battles in Miami Central. That's part of the reason why he was successful at Florida State and got a ring. I think this is how Florida State can get back to the top, making sure they go back to the well and get good players. On tomorrow's show, we're going to break down several of the players that are going to be coming in this next weekend. We're also going to be talking about some of the players that, quite honestly, should be really big focus points for recruiting. That's on tomorrow's show, so make sure you check us out on Friday. But again, thank you once again for checking out Locked On Seminoles here today. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Hit that like button, that notification bell, and subscribe and share this podcast. You can find me on X at FBScout_Florida. I will see everybody again tomorrow.